And today, I'm really delighted you've joined us and tuned in to this Talks With show. This one is a really interesting show and one that deeply resonates with my previous experience in the lubricants environment. And it stemmed from the UEIL event in Athens last October, where I kept hearing coming up in conversations about the challenges of attracting talent and retaining talent in the lubricant space. Now, as I said, I have firsthand experience about the challenges there. But instead of just hearing my thoughts, I also had the opportunity in Athens to bump into one of my friends in the segment and sector, James Moorehouse, who is the Director of Lubes and Fuels Global from ABN Resources Ltd. And James agreed to come onto the chat, onto the talk, and share some real insights and experiences about attracting, retaining, and nurturing talent in the lubricants and fuels space. So James, welcome. Thank you for agreeing to join me. And please just introduce yourself and share with people why you think this is such an important topic.
Well, Steve, thanks very much for having me. It's great to be part of the talk. And I'm sure what we're going to cover today will give some good value to your listeners and audience. The lubricants industry is facing a lot of challenges at the moment. You could talk about a post-COVID recovery. We have a war in the Ukraine, supply chain issues, raw material issues, inflationary pressures, economic headwinds, you name it, people are fighting a lot of fires. But what gets you through all of those challenges? It's people. So people are incredibly important to not just surviving in your company, but making your company thrive. And your audience and what they're telling you about talent attraction and retention being problematic, it does exist in the lubricants and fuels industry as a challenge as well. But I think what we can cover today is some great tips and advice on what are effective attraction methods, what are effective retention methods, so we can get businesses growing.
And brilliant. And I think one of the pieces that that my experience focuses deeply in is the environment of B2B sales. And one of the things that we see in the sales space particularly at the moment is a really high turnover rate. According to some studies, DePaul University say that the sort of sales positions have a 27% churn rate. I mean, it's kind of staggering when we think about how we like to build relationships, how we like to invest in account planning, how we like to think about how we drive, the sort of intimacy on understanding the value propositions we add. And people play such a fundamental part in that. But this high turnover clearly creates challenges for companies finding the talent within the churn. So it loses a lot of knowledge and really disrupts the sales process.
Yeah.
So with this, what sort of challenges do these companies face when just simply trying to attract and retain top sales talent? And how can they overcome these?
Well, I think it is disruptive when you lose staff, right? I mean, one thing you didn't mention is there is an actual cost. Some people say it's between 3 to 4 times that person's salary is what it costs your business when they walk out the door. Because you've got commercial losses, you've got downtime, you've got inefficiency with people covering 2 jobs whilst you're recruiting a replacement. Then you've got associated costs with recruiting that personnel and onboarding them as well. So it pays your bottom line to retain staff. You know, and that's before we talk about the impact it has on the customers that that business is serving as well. So yeah, mega important. So your question was, what can we do to attract and retain, right?
Yeah, I mean, interesting that you point that number one place is the retain. Yeah, I think that's a clear message out there. That's the first state. But yeah, exactly that. The question is, what can we do to attract and retain our top talent? And in my space, sales talent.
Okay. Well, I'm going to start backwards. I'm going to go with retention and then talk about attraction. So, retention, the first thing you've got to be aware of is today's workforce. It's not how it used to be. You don't join one company after school or after university and have a 20-year career there anymore. So seeing CVs where people have worked in a place for 2-3 years and then moved on to another organization for a different challenge is the norm. So businesses have got to do two things. One, you've got to make that person be profitable in the time that they're there. And that comes down to a lot of the systems and processes you have in your organization to make them as effective as quickly as possible. And that could be everything from a good training and development and onboarding program to perfect CRM systems. In a sales setting, a very clearly defined sales system and process, so people can be effective as quickly as possible. And that way, you know, if they leave after 3 years, it's actually not a horror story. They've actually contributed some value in that time frame. I have to say, in the lubricants industry, an average tenure is probably closer to 5 to 8 years in a company. So that's a longer time frame. So retention is pretty decent. However, we did a big industry report in the lubricant sector. We have about 23,000 contacts around the globe in lubricants. So we wrote to all of them and got their responses. And what the data tells us, if you're going to retain people effectively, you need to give proper career progression planning. So this is sitting down with people in your team, finding out where they want to go, what they want to do, and you need to talk about how you're going to get them there and the time scale that that's going to happen in and what they have to achieve to make that happen. So career progression planning with timescales, very important. The other big bit of data was leadership and management. The wrong leadership can push people away from a company, and the wrong management styles can do that as well. And interestingly, across all age demographics, the big traits that people wanted were a supportive and progressive leader, someone with empathy, someone who's very inclusive, gives clarity to the team, then gives the team space to deliver, and is constantly upskilling those people as well so they can progress and move on in their careers. So, you know, those are definitely the hot leadership traits to be exhibiting if you want to retain staff. And then finally, we saw mentoring or coaching opportunities as a way to retain people, either to be a mentor or to be mentored. This was a very rewarding experience in terms of personal development, either as the mentor or the mentee. You know, ultimately, my own belief is I think you have to give your staff autonomy, so freedom to deliver and execute, give them time and space to deliver tasks. I've never had a person come to me saying, I love the micromanagement in my job, please give me more of it. So that autonomy piece is really important. Then the mastery piece is really important. You know, people giving meaningful work, meaningful tasks to do, which they'll never quite get perfect, but that's the fun in it. It's like, you know, striving for that perfection and mastery engages people and retains people. And you got to give them purpose. So, something to strive for, something to work towards that's making a difference, that's a bigger purpose.
Well,
That's the hot retention bit.
Some huge challenges there around retention from a leadership perspective, because who teaches the leaders to lead, right? Who teaches the leaders to become effective leaders in an environment where maybe, with all of the challenges that you mentioned in our introduction, in a sense, there's a lot of pressure in the business to drive outcomes. So I think there's a real challenge here. I'm not saying a juxtaposition, but a real challenge for people to be cognizant of, that if they want to increase tenure of their people, and in the lube space, we say 5 to 8 years is kind of good. The world's changed. My 30-year career kind of doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
But the leaders, therefore, have to be very different within that environment, with a much more challenging backdrop, or a challenging backdrop of the current times, to drive results. Yeah. So retention plays a big part, but is a very difficult game to play, I would imagine.
It is, but you know what? Those leadership traits are rare in the lubes marketplace. There are some absolutely awesome leaders out there. So I'm not going to tar the whole industry with one brush, because that's completely inappropriate and wrong. But there's a lot that aren't doing it right if you listen to the feedback of the team. Yeah. And all recruitment business. So it's people in that team are calling us and telling us that feedback. So, you said at the beginning of your statement there, it's almost who coaches the leaders and who shows them how to lead. Well, I think that's a call on businesses to make sure that support is there for the leadership group. Quite a few leaders get promoted because they're an amazing salesperson. So they should just go and be a manager now. That's different skill set. You could definitely learn it. You can definitely develop it, but you need coaching and support, as does anyone at whatever level in the company they operate at.
And in this space of retention, with it being so critical, 3 to 4 times the cost of the employed person, the skills around nurturing and caring, the skills around the creation of a culture that allows people to make mistakes, as you described. I mean, you started to profile an environment that feels very inclusive. I think we probably don't go far back in our minds to think about some of the people we've observed and seen, maybe even worked with, where our pen profile of that person is perhaps a little different to that more inclusive environment that you just described. As you say, definitely not everybody, and definitely a lot of progress made, but still a lot to do. So I think there's some big takeaways already there for people around the retention aspect. What about the attraction aspect of the challenge?
Yeah, well, and hey, look, the nice thing is, if you do retention effectively, you don't have to worry about attraction so much, right? But maybe more positively, everything's growing. You need more people coming in. So how do you do that? Well, the first and probably the biggest point is awareness. Okay, so one thing I think the lubricant and the fuel industry could do more effectively is just having a greater awareness to people out there that could come and work in the industry. We see typically oil super majors, so your Shell's, Castrol, BP, Exxon, Total Energies, etc. That they start early. They're literally getting into schools and universities and running events, sending key personnel in there to talk about what a life in the industry could look like. And, that's raising an awareness of the STEM sector. but raising an awareness of the downstream segments of those oil majors as well. And it's proven to pick up good quality people. But every single business, if they don't want to do that, they all have access to things like LinkedIn and other social media platforms. And I mean, it's amazing. It's free. It requires time and effort. So, I appreciate that that's an application of cost and time to a degree. But what an amazing way to spread awareness and showcase what your business does. If you can create that awareness through social media and educate people on the value of not only what your company does, but what the sector does as a whole and the impact that it has on daily lives, that will attract talent. And the lubricants and fuel industry has a lot to be proud of. It's critical. It's everywhere. It literally keeps the world moving. You can have amazing careers in it, which again, you need to be showcasing and talking about to attract people as well. There are companies on a meaningful venture. This could be a sustainability message. It could be about energy transition. If you can, again, communicate that meaningful work, and it's like, hey, this is something you could be a part of, that is going to attract people as well. A fundamental point is you've got to pay the right money. It's a competitive marketplace for talent, you've got to pay at the right level. If you don't, you don't have a place on the field to play the game. But then once the pay right to play the rest of the game, it's all about that awareness and showing meaningful work and showing career progression to attract people.
And I agree with you. I think there's some incredible stories to be told. There does appear to be a reticence to tell that story.
Yeah, I don't know why. It's like, it's so bugging. Like,
yeah.
it's, I don't know if it's conservatism or what, but I mean, God, there is some amazing content to get out there. But
I imagine, James, it's a pretty easy target for a slightly different agenda to be overlaid by a social commentary. And I think, therefore, the fear perhaps is the motivator that stops it. In a B2B selling environment, when we train people, we talk about the power of social media. We talk about the power of LinkedIn to get your personal brand out there above that of your organization. And actually, it is fear, the fear of saying the wrong thing, that prevents people grabbing the opportunity. A missed opportunity, I would underline and agree with you.
Yeah. Hey, look, we all make mistakes, right? So, and I get fear as a limiting factor for people. But I'll just share an experience that happened to me. In 2021, we went through a process of making ABN Resource a carbon neutral business. And we actually went one step further, where we went carbon positive, where essentially all our emissions were offset. And we thought we were doing a great thing, and we wanted to inspire others to take that step as well and play their role in environment. So we went on LinkedIn and published our certification and our methods, and it's probably the most viral post we've ever done, where the outpouring of negative commentary was prolific. Everybody had an opinion on what we did wrong, but none of them shared an opinion on what right looked like. Now, was that the response we expected? No. Was it the response we wanted? No, because we just wanted to raise awareness to inspire more people to do it. What did we do in that scenario? Well, we took it as an opportunity to engage with people. They're like, well, okay, so what should we be doing? You tell us. Or actually, some of them were saying lubricants are an awful thing and it's oil and it's dirty. And we were like, well, it's not actually. It makes things more efficient, so your emissions lower. And, what do you think keeps wind turbines turning? So it was an actually from a negative situation, it became an opportunity to educate and engage, and for them to be informed, but also for me to be informed on what we need to communicate better. So operate without fear. Just give it a bash. I mean, you've got literally nothing to lose.
Nothing to lose, and you said earlier, it's free. So that's a bonus, and I think it does. You know, this area of attraction is one where I've got 3 daughters. I've got 3 daughters at the moment, at the time of recording. They're 24, 21, and 18, and it's an interesting thing that this kind of environment is not one that has ever been brought in their conscious awareness, other than dad working for them. But what they get from their peer group is probably something less than positive. It's probably not based on knowledge. It's based on media perceptions or their own personal beliefs and perceptions. And I guess in some ways that leads me to probably where I want to take the second question. Not is my daughter's is your target answer for this, but I'm thinking more broadly around the multi-generational workforce, right? And I'm thinking about connecting some of the things you've already mentioned, leadership and the challenge that leadership have, and perhaps how some of the promotion over time is from somebody that's been in the job, maybe not the leader, more the manager. And then we've got a workforce, Gen X, Gen Zs, we've got millennials. You know, how do they all cohabit when, you know, I as a baby boomer might look at them and go, my God, they're not even doing a full day's work. How do we get over this, you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're right. The younger generations do look for more flexible working. So probably, you know, what you recognize as a day's work looks different for a lot of other people. Awareness, again, it's a recurring theme. You know, if you're aware of multi-generational differences, that's a good start point. I always get a little bit scared when I talk about multi-generational differences because, you know, I'm a millennial and sometimes people call millennials lazy, but, you know, Mark Zuckerberg is a millennial, Spotify, a millennial, Airbnb CEO, a millennial. You know, they're three of probably the 5 biggest companies in the world. So, you know, are those guys lazy? I don't think they are. So rather than kind of look across the generations, I would encourage people to look at the person that's opposite them if you're going to give them a happy home. So you've really got to be aware of what's in front of you and what you're dealing with and appreciate that everybody's different. How do you do that? Well, your communication skills have got to be on point. You've got to be able to listen effectively. You've got to be able to ask questions effectively to really understand, you know, the motivating factors behind a person. I do believe there are some fundamentals that go across any age group, though. And for me, everyone has a right to be happy. So how do you make them happy? I think if you spoke to anyone at any stage of their life, they would want to feel respected. They would want to be dealt with courtesy and honesty. They would want to feel supported in the work that they were doing, and they'd want to feel listened to. And I think if you can do those things to your workforce at whatever level of experience they are, you will have an engaged workforce.
Yeah. It's got me thinking around the importance. You mentioned awareness, but it's the messaging within the awareness, right? So when I start to think about my journey in lubricants, and even looking at let's not just say the culture, but maybe some of the job descriptions, it was all about delivering results. It was all about achievement. It was all about, now all of those things are great. Yeah. But actually, you're overlaying. It's also about demonstrating care, demonstrating respect. It's almost that emotional side of the piece that is consistent now, but maybe more overt in people's requirements when they choose to work for somebody. Because the bit in all of this is they choose to work for you, right? So yeah, so that choice is driven by their ability to reference you against other people's messaging and how other people actually demonstrate that they care and respect you.
Well, and it's what you're saying there tells me also about the importance of value alignment. And this comes back to an attraction and a retention point that we were discussing earlier. You, Steve, will have a set of values that, guide your moral and ethical compass and the way that you like to be. Companies will have that too. And, when people and companies can align on values, that's where you get very healthy workplace cultures, because you can say something like, treat people how you like to be treated. And because everybody has the same value set, they know what treating someone right should be. And also it's a happier, higher performing workplace culture that they want to stay in or want to go and be a part of. So it works across attraction and retention, as well as this multi-generational point that we're talking about as well.
Yeah, I mean, to hover on the multi-generational point, and I know we don't like to stereotype as your example of some of the most successful people in the sort of the business world.
Yeah,
I mean, they were all males.
I probably am a lazy millennial, though, just to make sure.
Just to help the conversation balance. Yeah, I mean, excluding the gender aspect in this as well, which is not part of the multi-generational observation. There is a gender piece that I see certainly playing out in sales teams at the front line. But are you seeing, as ABN, a pull to younger people to apply for roles? Or are you still seeing it as quite a closed network of people just moving around roles?
I don't think it's one or the other, but it's probably somewhere in the middle. If it was a school report, I'd say that piece is improving, but could do better. In a younger audience that have recently entered the industry, maybe through like a graduate scheme or something like that, they're coming to the end of their rotations after 2 years tenure, and somewhere between 2 to 5 years, we're seeing them leave the companies they joined as graduate. And the biggest piece of feedback there is around energy transition, and they're not seeing the pace of change be quick enough in those organizations, and they want to be involved in more sustainability or environmentally friendly work, which is a pity, because the oil companies actually are in an amazing place to affect change in that sector. So, they could very much be a part of that solution if they stuck around. But, that's not happening because the pace of change isn't quick enough. And there is a bit of circling of talent as you go later on into your career. And I welcome that, because there's very talented people in the industry that can bring valuable experiences to other companies and contribute there. But I do think there's more jobs than there are people. So that system's actually ultimately failing and causing some problems. So I would encourage people to take the blinkers off and look at a more diverse talent pool, recruit from other sectors, and other industry profiles, and realize the benefits of having different personalities, different experiences, different beliefs, different cultures coming into your organization. Because if you read any report from a major consultancy, a major university or academic institute, they all say diversity and inclusion is good for business, both in terms of culture and performance and profitability.
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely my experience of my time working in Shell was when that became an absolute imperative, the richness of the decisions, the culture, the environment was magnified, and it's made me a much more aware individual because of that. So I entirely agree.
Problem solving and creativity too, right? I bet when you've got people around a table taking on a difficult challenge, having different brains and different ways of thinking to tackle that is a very beneficial thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, you talk about all of this in the energy transition piece around pace for that. Just to draw a parallel into the conversation for the listeners, we see one of the reasons that younger people who have been attracted into an organization from a sales perspective leave is because of the pace of the digital adoption. So they expect there to be a more connected digital way of working. And therefore, sometimes some of this more closed view of people that have always been in our industry taking the senior jobs, they're not bringing in that different thinking into how do we modernize and digitalize the way we engage with customers. So they're creating this almost barrier between ease of doing business and customer experience by protecting the environment of what they know, which is a much more traditional approach to sales. So I'm really just complimenting and tagging on to your comment around the energy transition with the sales story.
That's really interesting insight. And I mean, what do you think? Leadership must have a part to play in that, right? In terms of the adoption of these changing realities and the rise of digitalization. They've got to be on board with that to make the changes, right?
Well, I think it's a curious thing. And I think it's a curious thing because if you look at the lubes and fuel space, we've taken quite a lot of strides in digital. The supply chain, inventory, vendor management, all of this stuff, we've taken quite big strides. But actually, the interface between your sales force and your customer is the piece that becomes the hardest part for people in that leadership to ultimately connect to, which for me is curious in itself, because as consumers, B2C, our world is entirely digital. I bet everybody who is watching this in a digital format has also been looking at Amazon, has also been on Spotify, has also been on YouTube, has read reviews, has done all of those things that we take as commonplace. Yet there's a barrier that doesn't drive that natural correlation over to, well, it must be the same for our buyers in this industry. Quite an interesting step to go.
Well, yeah. And consumers are so much better informed these days as well, aren't they? It's, I almost find when I'm selling in my business, 90% of the job is done before I'm in a meeting or a phone call with them, because they've researched our business, spoken to a few people, maybe got dialed into our business because they got a referral from someone. The buyer these days are way more educated because of the digital tools that they have. And I think organizations need to wake up to that fact a little bit.
Now, I'm sure you just grabbed 90% out of your sort of But let me give you something that's going to really sort of make you go, well, I wasn't far away. And then we'll just jump back into me asking you the third question. But you've turned the tables here, so let me give you the answer. 57% to 80%, some say 80% of a buyer's decision is made before they pick up the phone or invite you to see them. So as an organization, if you are not embracing digital and communicating the story, the awareness part that you spoke about earlier, to your potential customers, you are missing an enormous opportunity. And the self-same thing is clearly in the space of attracting talent. You've got to communicate early, because that's where the decisions are made. And maybe this is going to be one of the answers to the third question. So you spoke about the school report being could do better.
Yeah. It's a mark I often heard as a youngster. Yeah.
Red pen James. Yeah. What could they do better? What are some of those common mistakes? What could they do better?
Well, they could do better on the awareness piece for sure. Like, I don't think the industry does a good enough job in communicating the value of what it does. There are some businesses that I really admire in that space, though. So I think Fuchs, Kluber, Neste, Chevron. If you look at their social media strategies, for example, they do an amazing job of showcasing what the company's about, what careers look like in those businesses, what the industry and the impact is that it's making, and what their products do in that environment. So, if I was wanting to go and get educated, like those buyers we just talked about, but it's a candidate in this scenario, I think you'd be very impressed if you started looking at those kind of businesses. But that's only 4 examples I can give, and we've got 976 lubricant companies on our database. So it kind of shows they're in the minority rather than the majority. And everybody, no matter what size of company you are, you have a story and an identity that's unique to you that will appeal to someone. And you only need one person to be the right person for a job. You don't need 700 or whatever. So you just need to find a way of speaking to that one person that you want to attract the talent that you need.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a common thread running through all of your answers, isn't it? And I think it's really something for people listening to grab hold of. Have we got our story? Have we really got what it is we're communicating to not only people we might be looking to attract, but the staff we have in our organization today that really connects them to, you've mentioned values, purpose, the broader agenda that we are responsible for. Yeah.
But look, there are companies hiring now who, are like, James, great, I'll raise awareness, but I need someone yesterday. So what do you do in that scenario? Well, actually, we identified there's quite a few mistakes they're doing already, which is why they haven't hired anyone yet. And it's quite simple to fix. But businesses go out to market looking for someone, but it's a very poorly defined recruitment brief. They don't actually know what they're really looking for. So that's mistake number 1, not being clear on what you want. Another mistake is, at the levels we deal with, there's multiple stakeholders in the It's frozen.
We're back.
Yeah. Okay. Shall I start? I'll start again from the second mistake.
Second mistake. We've got the first one, not clear on the piece.
Yeah. Okay. So the second mistake we see is there's multiple stakeholders in a recruitment process, but stakeholder 1 is not aligned with stakeholders 2 priorities, and stakeholder 2 isn't aligned with stakeholder 3. So not only do you have a poorly defined brief, but you have 3 different people saying the number 1 priority is 3 different things. So, you need to get the brief right, and you need to have alignment across stakeholders correctly done. The third thing comes down to a poor candidate experience. So if you start interviewing, but you don't have defined timescales for interview, like I'm going to complete interview 1 by this date, interview 2 by this date, you're going to get feedback on this day and on this day, and we're going to make a decision by this day. If you don't do that, the processes run on and on and on. And in all that time, a candidate's thinking, well, if they're this slow in making a decision, what are they like working for? If they're this sketchy in handling a process with me, what are they going to be like serving customers? It gives a very negative perception of a candidate you're trying to attract to your business if you let timescales slide. So you really got to make that candidate experience amazing. And then the final mistake we see happening is the offer not meeting the candidate's expectation. I know there are companies out there that will go, okay, yeah, that's the expectation. We're going to go in 10% less and see what they say. It's just a starting point. We'll offer them what they need if they need to, but we might save a bit. And there's no point. People are just going to say no and not be willing to negotiate and take another job elsewhere. Or you'll get to a point where you've negotiated up to the level that the candidate wanted in the first place. They're going to feel undervalued and underappreciated before they've even joined your company because they really had to fight for that salary. So pay people what they expect and what they're worth, and don't mess around.
I mean, I think there's some really incredibly powerful insights and advice there, right? And you make them sound so very straightforward and simple, but I think you prefaced your answer by saying that they are easy to overcome. So, sometimes what is obvious actually is the answer. I think in a sales compensation space, I mean, I don't know whether you have a view here. I think one of the challenges is that people expect a lot. You move into a sales environment and you kind of expect that a lot comes with that. Actually, Salesforce, it's an American data point, but tell us that 54% of sellers, sales reps, however you term them, expect to earn over $100,000 in compensation. So their bonus element is kind of up there in their view of what they're going to get. But it's not just all about the money. We've spoken about that, right? How might you respond to that as a leader in a business? Have you come across how that kind of gets played out?
Yeah, well, and an interesting data point for your listeners in America. We see lubricants sales roles covering a region in lubes. They're probably starting at 120 and going up to 150 as a base salary in the marketplace. So that's kind of away from Salesforce report. That's where I'd see the industry expectation being. To your question, what do you do as a leader? It's very hard to attract the right person to your business if you don't pay the right money. So I would really call on leaders to make sure they have an appropriate budget. And if they don't have an appropriate budget, they start making some compromises on the type of person and experience level that they bring into the business. There is more than likely going to be that candidate out there who has a wildly unrealistic view of their worth in the marketplace. But if you're using a recruiter in that process, that's where the recruiter can be a voice of reason. So that helps. It's emphasizing the other things away from pay, which is good for the candidate. So you may have a really good variable pay element of your package offer, which when they're educated on exactly how easy that is to attain, they might have a more favorable view of the base salary. But again, it's demonstrating meaningful work. It's talking about the company culture. It's talking about the progression you can do. If you can get those things across as the employer, that will help secure people at the right pay level as well.
Yeah, so I mean, this has been a fascinating conversation with a lot of insights. We've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about challenges for attracting, but more importantly, retaining, because of the financial penalty for not doing the retention piece right. We've spoken about some of the challenges or multi-generational workforces, but how bringing in different experiences can open up the thinking, change the mindset. Great for you said sort of solving problems and coming up with new solutions. You've shared with us the common mistakes that people make, and I think that really sticks in my mind now about awareness. Just that story to tell, and the fact 4 out of, what did you say, 970 plus? Yeah. I mean, come on, guys, we've got work we can do here. I think that's really great, and I think you start to talk about the role of leadership, which I think is a whole nother conversation that we can exploit. But you talk about the emerging new skill set of leaders to respond to an environment where the tenure is 5 to 8 years, where the expectation is one of more of care, respect, one of culture that allows mistakes to happen. And that is running in the same race as the organizations that we know have faced more and more challenges that seem to be never ending in this lubricant supply chain and operations area. So I think we've covered so much when we look back at this, James. The last thing to do is please let people know where they can find you. And from that, we'll move on and wish everybody a good day. James, where can people find you?
So you can find ABN Resource, just type it into Google, be the first hit. LinkedIn, we're very active on there as well. ABN Resource, my profile's James Moorehouse. Be a pleasure to connect with anyone that feels I can help them.
Thank you, James. And from me, thank you for picking up on this conversation that we began in a cocktail lounge in Athens. Hopefully we get to see each other on the circuit very, very soon. UEIL in May, the Lubes Bearing Expo in Essen, and ILMA at the back end October this year. Let's see where we go.
Yeah, I'm doing all three, so we'll grab the cocktail again sometime.
See you soon, James.
Cheers, Steve.